So if you've been following this whole Brexit really debacle since the beginning, you know full well that a lot of this post-Brexit nonsense has been heavily, and I mean heavily driven by post-imperial nostalgia of Brexiteers and even Brexiteer supporters fantasizing about the idea of a bygone Britain that can never ever truly be. Like we've discussed before, the idea when the Brexiteers talk about free trade, they're referring to at least the late 18th century, where Britain essentially decided that it was going to have no tariffs on essentially imports coming into this country. But of course, they forget the fact to talk about that while other countries could indeed, import into the country for 0% tariffs, what they forget to mention is the fact that we had colonies that we could control and extort for essentially whatever we want. Not only that, but all the British industry at that time basically had exclusivity in those colonies as well, meaning that those colonies were essentially a completely captive market for all the British industry at that time. And again, they completely forget to mention that little thing. But we are seeing that they talk about this wonders of free trade as if, again, they've just discovered it. Again, free trade has many different meanings, and especially to Brexiteers, it can mean something completely different to when I talk about free trade being on the left. So it is well worth knowing that when they talk about free trade, they're talking not only just about completely eliminating tariffs, they're also talking about getting rid of regulation as well, because that was one of their big motivating factors for trying to get out of the EU, because then they could completely get rid of tariffs and regulations completely, because they are free market fundamentalists and they fully 100% believe that the government should have absolutely no handling in how the market operates. They fully believe that there should be winners and losers, even if the losers end up being hundreds of thousands of people unemployed. Again, they don't like to say that, but that is effectively what they are saying. So today we go to Carnegie, which is a strategic, the Carnegie organization is like a strategic brand. It's like a think tank almost with the global eye on different things. So this is sort of an American type of view of things, but this is from Carnegie Europe. So we'll see what they have to think about, shall we say, Brexit's chances of a global Britain. And they don't fancy them quite a bit. But before we jump into that, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page and a link to a one-off donation page called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people who do support the channel those ways. So this, as we said, comes from Carnegie Europe, and the title is Britain's post-Brexit ambitions will be modest, not global. So Boris Johnson talks frequently of his ambitions for global Britain. He wants the United Kingdom post-Brexit to play a greater role around the world. In a government report published in March, he said that it was vital for the UK's safety and prosperity, and definitely not a vain-glorious gesture. So how seriously should we take Britain's Prime Minister? Very, say his supporters. However, here are some examples that they cite. A new aircraft carrier has set off on its inaugural journey to join Dutch and American ships patrolling the South China Seas. In mid-June, the UK will host the G7 summit. In November, it will host another big gathering, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP26. All the while, the UK is busy negotiating new trade deals with other countries, now that the EU no longer does so on Britain's behalf. And the UK remains a nuclear power within NATO, with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. But that's just one side of the ledger. But it's not the whole story. Here are some other things that Johnson's critics put on the other side. Even after the launch of its new aircraft carrier, Britain's navy will still be only half the size it was 20 years ago, and only 1/4 the size it was in 1982. It would be impossible today to put together a large task force that the Navy sent that year to replicate the Falklands, to recapture the Falkland Islands. To be sure, the UK is hosting the G7 and COP26 summits, but there is still no evidence that being a host bestows particular influence. With climate change in particular, the key players are the United States, China, and the EU. 3 months ago, the EU set out its plans to become carbon neutral by 2050. But the UK, of course, left the EU and is now a minor actor in the climate drama. And its own recently revised targets attract very little attention to the other countries. So all the trade deals so far that have been concluded are essentially rollover agreements that continue the agreements Britain had as a member of the EU. If anything, the UK is far less global than it was because it has become harder for the UK to trade with the EU. It faces broader checks and rules of origin restrictions on the trade of goods assembled in the UK containing components imported from non-EU countries. The UK's international development programme is no longer setting shining examples to the rest of the world. In one of the few countries, it was the few countries to meet the UN target of spending 0.7% of its economy on aid. However, in April, the government cut its aid budget more than 1/3, with immediate effect. Given the need to honour long-term commitments to, for example, the UN agencies, this impact has been severe and has forced cuts on many programmes. These include humanitarian aid to Yemen by more than half, and bilateral aid to sub-Saharan Africa by 2/3, and funding of water, sanitation and hygiene projects by more than 4/5. To these examples, we should add a larger point about Britain's place in the world. 6 decades ago, Deacon Anderson, who helped create the post-war world as the US Secretary of State, famously said, "Great Britain has lost an empire, but it has not yet found a role." By joining the European community in 1973, Britain found a role. It became the bridge between the US and Europe. That bridge is not as big or as strong as British leaders would like to think, but it has made a difference. Sharing a language, history and culture with one continent and a continent with the other, Britain was able to develop close bonds both to help and develop common approaches to global issues. Brexit, however, has blown that bridge up. The UK's relations with the EU are now cold and awkward. Britain remains friendly toward the United States, but is now far less useful to Washington. If Washington wants to deal with Europe, it now just bypasses London and deals directly with Brussels and Paris and Berlin. What's more, US President Joe Biden feels strongly about his Irish roots, so he will not be impressed by Johnson's attempt to rewrite the UK-EU Northern Ireland Protocol, which the Prime Minister signed no less than 6 months ago. Anything, and even with the faintest whiff of British bad faith, will go down very badly in the White House. And recently, the prestigious US Council on Foreign Relations proposed a concert of powers for a global era. The Council suggested that its members should be the US, China, the EU, Russia, Japan and India. By its absence from the list, Britain has been relegated to a second division of world powers, despite having nuclear weapons and its UN Security Council seat. So the big question, does this actually matter? One of the UK's problems is the nostalgia for past glories tends to swamp its present identity. Brexit Britain is discovering that it has very little influence and even less power to actually solve the world's big problems, such as tackling climate change, fighting terrorism, preventing further pandemics, standing up to China, and taxing big footloose technology companies. All in all, the days of self-exaggerated self-importance are finally over. A more modest Britain is on the way. Gradually, that reality is likely to sink in, and it could change the way Britain as a nation thinks and acts, and very possibly this would be for the better. But this is not what Johnson and his fellow Brexiteers intended, but this could end up being their most valuable legacy. So I think that strikes completely true of this. And we've been saying this back from the very, very beginning of all this. The Brexiteers and the Brexit supporters are obsessed with this imperial nostalgia about it. All their plans revolve around a Britain that can never be again. The idea that Britain can be a trading power again. Again, Britain does not have the fleet nor the merchant fleet to be able to support that anymore. It doesn't have the colonies to be able to support the system of completely zero tariffs and free trade anymore. And even that, back in the 18th century, was done away with because, what surprise, surprise, farmers in the UK were being hurt by imports of corn from America. Again, history has a very, very bizarre way of repeating itself, but then there you go. And more, we will come to realise, and as people in the UK will come to realise, that we do not have the power and influence that the Brexiteers so infamously claim that we do. Like I say, if Joe Biden wants to go deal with something in the EU now, they'll just bypass London. We are no longer an important tool to the White House. The Atlantic Bridge project that essentially was meant to connect Europe to the UK and then the UK to America, we blew that bridge up because of Brexit. Like I say, this is very public policy, and I do hope that this does happen because we need to detoxify our self-deluded grandeur that we have in this country. Because when we actually start to talk about things really and seriously, then leaving the EU was a dumb idea. Because you come to realise that now. And the host of various other things that we can do in this country will be brought, I think, far, far more into focus. And one of the things I hope from the coronavirus, how that has not only shone a complete light on the inequalities going on in the UK, but hopefully we'll be able to, shall we say, remove this government, hopefully in the next election, and actually start to change things properly. Because I tell you now, this government ain't interested in trying to solve serious inequality in this country. They're more interested about chasing imperialist, nostalgic dreams. Hence why we're trying to do all this crazy stuff. And again, it's complete nonsense. But there you go. So, as is always, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And thank you to all those people who do support the channel. And as always, we'll see you all next time.